today I will be talking to you about the the George Floyd Act and what it encompasses about police reform, and also, the need for police reform itself. So I'm going to start with the story of Victor White, the case of Victor White. This was actually a story I had come across in the article "Hands Up, Don't Shoot" by Aisha Nunes, where she talks about the need for body cameras. And this is a case that really encompasses that, because in March of 2014, Victor was only 25 years old. He had been stopped by police for suspicion of being in an altercation. And in that questioning, he was patted down and searched and was found to have marijuana and cocaine on his person. So he was then arrested for possession. Now, this is where the story gets confusing. According to the police reports, when he arrived at the police department, he refused to leave the vehicle and did not want to enter. So from there, he managed to grab a handgun out of his pocket and shoot himself in the back. Now, here are a couple discrepancies with that story. For one, the police had just searched him. So after patting him down, having found a small bag of marijuana and a small bag of cocaine, it's hard to believe that they did not find a handgun if he had that on his person. Also, it's confusing because he was handcuffed in the back of the police vehicle. So to claim that he was able to pull the handgun out of his pocket and then shoot himself in the back seemed to be an extreme circumstance. However, later on, the coroner then releases that he was actually shot in the chest, not the back. Despite that being impossible to do in handcuffs, the coroner still went ahead and ruled it a suicide. So, of course, no criminal charges were brought against anybody. However, all the discrepancies in the story did bring a lot of outrage. So, the family did settle a lawsuit with the police department. However, with the cases that have come up in recent days and all the, videos that have been exposed and, with civilians being standard buyers and recording things, it's hard not to imagine how this investigation would have gone differently for Victor White had there been some kind of surveillance. And not even just the investigation, but how the whole altercation itself would have been conducted had they known that they were under surveillance and being held accountable for their own actions. So with this, we're going to get into the issue of police misconduct. Police misconduct is a huge and growing issue. It has been since the history of the police force, but it is also an underrated one. And I say underrated because USA Today, back in 2019, they had listed an expose of over 85,000 law enforcement officers with a bunch of misconduct reports that hadn't been available to the public to view before. These reports had ranged from, things such as police brutality to planting evidence, as far as even, sexual harassment and so on and so forth. There were over 200,000 cases underneath these officers. And the scary part is that most of these were never actually officially reported. A lot of these cases were protected by not only police unions, but also political affiliates. And it's scary to think that when this was actually posted and everybody was able to see, only 33,000 of the officers involved had been decertified by this time. So what that means for us is that by the time this expose was posted, over 60% of those officers were still in an active line of duty, still out on the streets. Adam Dunn also does a great job of really encompassing the issue with the misreporting and the underreporting of police misconduct. In his article, Constructing a Better Estimate of Police Misconduct, he highlights 2 failed attempts where people had tried to, kind of create a registry and create some kind of database for all this information. And one of those was the Department of Justice. They have their own Bureau of Justice Statistics. However, the issue with their questioning was that they were mostly focused on excessive use of force and didn't really, encompass all the things to do with police misconduct. And after them, the International Association of Chiefs of Police had attempted to do their own little registry and data collection. However, the issue with that was out of the, I think, 18,000 police departments and police agencies all across the country, only 150 of them were willing to give up their information and provide all that data for them. So now knowing how underreported it is and how much under the table is going on, like what does the George Floyd Act do for us? How do we hold these people accountable? Oop, we'll head there. So a couple of things that the George Floyd Act really encompasses is prohibiting racial and religious discriminatory profiling. So what they do with that is, one, they do have stricter outlines on how to deal with situations like this, and two, they do want to mandate training on profiling and discrimination for all law enforcement officers. This also does create a standard or a uniform use of force standard for all law enforcement. For one, it would ban the chokehold that seems to have caused a lot of very, highlighted cases in recent years. Was the chokehold, looking at Eric Garner, not so much a chokehold, but choking with the case of George Floyd himself and so on. Also, the case of Breonna Taylor has brought about the idea of banning no-knock warrants, basically where police can serve a warrant without knocking the door and announcing themselves. Another thing that they're trying to do is to enforce de-escalation tactics, so that the use of deadly force should not be used until it is an absolute last resort. Another thing that they're also trying to do is to redefine how they would use deadly force. Rather than it being a reasonable force, it needs to be deemed a necessary force, rather than, something that they could have felt or they could have been in fear and so on. It needs to show an absolute necessary use of deadly force against a person. Another thing is to require body cams on all law enforcement officers and dash cams in federal vehicles. This is another thing of just, holding them accountable. Although some people like to argue it's an invasion of privacy, when we look at cases like the case of Victor White, it's very heartbreaking to think how differently things could have gone had we known that we were able to see what was happening. It also increases accountability for officers, because when you're being watched, you're going to do the right thing. Outside of that, they're also trying to enforce a registry being held of all police misconduct. Like we had, mentioned those 2 failed attempts earlier. This would then hold that responsibility on the law enforcement agencies themselves, and not only keep a registry, but also, keep it organized, as in listing it by race, by gender, by age, how these things have, occurred, and so on. They also would like to eliminate the qualified immunity, and that's pretty much what gives a cop immunity in a case where he uses deadly force. Because he's in the line of duty, he has gained immunity. And if we do get rid of that, it definitely ups the standard for when that use of force needs to be used. On top of that, we're also trying to amend the crime statute so that you can prosecute for police misconduct. And I mean prosecute as a civilian. So if the use of deadly force was deemed unnecessary, then it would then be considered a murder charge. So yeah, those are basically kind of the bigger picture things that would hold them more accountable for their actions and how to create a more uniform standard for law enforcement. There are a couple of more things that we could go over, but for the sake of time, those are the big highlights. So what can we do personally to get this going forward? So right now, the George Floyd Act has passed through the House, thankfully, and now it is pending in the Senate. So as we wait for that, and as we kind of keep our hopes in that, it's still important to voice your support for it. And a big way to do that is to sign the petition at the NAACP website. So they are actually partially funding the movement of that act forward through the government. And another thing that they're doing is they're having this petition go around that encompasses some of the things in the George Floyd Act, like the specific things such as like immunity and use of force and so on. And so this is basically another way to voice your support for those specific things in the police reform. Another thing you can do is contact your senators, contact your elected officials, and let them know. At the end of the day, We are all constituents, so your opinion, your voice matters, and it's important to voice your concerns on the issue. And the more people do that, the more awareness, the more attention it brings to it. Another thing you can do, just simply put, is just spread the word. Spread the word to your friends, your family, your social media, and really get more people aware of what's going on and have more eyes on the movement of this act. Because again, when the world is watching, people act differently, correct? So pretty much after speaking on all this, I'll go ahead and stop sharing that. So the whole point of the George Floyd Act, all in all, is police reform. Police reform is necessary. We do have a very big issue with police misconduct. And the George Floyd Act is something that could really reverse that. And the things that we can do on our own just is highlighting the things that the George Floyd Act encompasses, like the need for body cameras, the need for, the change of deadly use of force from reasonable to necessary. Those are really big steps in that program. So hopefully in the future, there would no longer ever be a case such as the one as Victor White.